Welcome everybody to the third and final of this season's Non-Fiction Lab Creative Resilience series. And we're very excited today to have Dr. Peta Murray, who is going to be talking to us about herself and what we all could become, which is hot scholars. My name, for anybody that hasn't met me, I'm David Carlin. I'm the co-director of the Non-Fiction Lab. Welcome to you all. Before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Garubanud country, down on the surf coast, where I am very lucky to be living at the moment. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and to acknowledge that this is unceded sovereign land, as is all of the lands across the continent from which all of us here are joining, and feel free to put in the chat where you're joining from as well. Yes, Peter is going to present for us for 35 or so minutes, I think. It's pretty informal, these creative resilience sessions. There'll be some time at the end, we hope, for some Q&A. And feel free, as usual, to put any questions, comments in the chat as we go along. Peter might choose to look at these, or if not, I will keep track of them and bring some of them up later on. So Peta Murray, for those of you who haven't yet met her, is a lecturer in creative writing with us. She calls herself, among other things, a para-academic. She has sometimes been known to call herself a recovering playwright. Her research focus is the role of language and arts-based practices as modes of inquiry and forms of cultural activism. She has produced many award-winning plays, fiction, collaborative, queer and multimodal works of live art, and also works of what she calls the essayesque. She publishes a neologism a day currently at mycorona.wordpress.com, which is very well worth checking out. So without further ado, over to you, Peta.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you to the Non-Fiction Lab for inviting me to make this presentation this afternoon, and thank you for over-egging the pudding on the introduction there, particularly with your reference to My Corona. I'm always grateful for a bit of product placement. Before I go any further, I too would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from unceded land. I'm on the surf coast of Victoria on Wadawurrung country. Saltwater people are the traditional owners of this country, and I pay my respects to them and to their elders, past and present. Now, something weird is going on because I know I have presentation notes prepared and they're not showing, and I don't know whether that's because I've pressed the wrong button, but I'm going to be pressing some buttons in the background. No, I don't want to do that, just to see if I can correct the issue. And if I can't, I'm just going to have to continue to hurl myself into what I've already realised is quite a kind of a metatextual enterprise, in as much as a presentation on a presentation seems to already take us somehow towards a kind of theatre of the absurd. If anyone has any advice for me on how to switch to presenter mode in Teams, I would be very grateful for the interactivity of this. And I guess one of the first things that I want to say to you is that I think the notion of the presentation, particularly as we come to it in the academy, is a somewhat antiquated thing. It comes with a whole lot of expectations and conventions that may once have served us well, but may not necessarily serve us as well as they once did. And so I think we have a duty as presenters in the 21st century to really try to push the form in a different way so that we are taking advantage of the times and the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Now, already I am doing something that I would advise you never to do. And I'm going to enact a lot of these things for you this afternoon. I'm going to try and show you some of the more problematic moments of presentation. I don't have notes, and my presenter notes, as you know, now have disappeared. And I am currently trying to split my mind into two channels. The one channel is trying to solve the problem of the fact that my notes have disappeared and people are making helpful comments in the chat. The other part of my mind is focused on speaking to you, to those of you I can see, and I can see a couple of people have their cameras on, so I can actually make eye contact with those people, and I'm grateful to them for that. And at the same time, I have the hideous spectacle of myself in multiple guises on the slide before you. So this kind of, you know, multi-brain, multi-channeled aspect of presentation is but one of the challenges that we need to think about as we present in this kind of mode. Now, I'm going to give up on the presentation notes. I can't, without stopping things now, I can't recover them. So I'm simply going to do what I would typically do in a presentation, which is that I'm going to call on the considerable preparation that I have done. That's the secret. I could finish now. The secret of a good presentation is preparation and preparation and preparation. I didn't do it on purpose, David Carlin. I'll show you the notes later. But this is the thing that I have no notes. I would have had these little sort of dot points beside my slides, but I don't have those now. So I just have the images, and you'll notice that so far they have precious little text on them. They're simply just images, and they have a certain function which I will elaborate on as I go forward. I just want to go back to the title of this presentation for a moment, though, because, of course, you know, in an ideal world, we would be meeting together in some sort of communal space. And when Hot Scholar began a few years ago as an in-house program for the non-fiction lab, it was designed as a little tiny workshop that would take place once every few weeks in a room together. These days, of course, everything is filtered through what I call the double glazing of the screen interfaces that we're dealing with. It makes it doubly difficult. So in thinking about this presentation today, I've particularly tried to consider what I've been working with in having to pivot, like we all have, until we have whiplash, to the affordances of the on-the-screen presentation. So that will be factored into what I'm going to talk about today. Now, as you'll see, I'm a bit of a shrinking violet, and I do tend to try to hide behind all kinds of different masks and guises. And this is true just as much in the real world of theatre, which is where I come from, as it is in the academy. I cannot emphasize enough that I have a persona that I bring into these situations, and we're very close. And we've worked together on the presentations, but she is not me. And so yes, over years and years of this, I have learnt to step into the role of presentation and out again with a degree of fluency. Now, I'll say that again, with a degree of fluency. The enemy of the public presentation, and this is particularly true for us, is our perfectionism. We go into these things expecting to deliver something that is eloquent, that is polished, that is well-formed, that is memorable, that is delivered without technological difficulty, that is received in the spirit in which it's offered. It's very unlikely that all of those things are going to happen. As you've seen already, the wheels are falling off for me, left, right and centre. So letting go of that perfectionism quite early in the piece, knowing that you've done the best you can to prepare, to do what you have been asked to do, and not doing what most of us do afterwards. And this is actually the worst part of public speaking, even though you've been told that death and public speaking are two of the worst things that can ever happen to you. I'm going to add a third thing to that. The third worst thing after death and public speaking are the afterthoughts you have after public speaking. And that is the time when you tell yourself, but I didn't say that. But I didn't pause there. I could have answered that question so much better. And it's that part of it that really kicks in afterwards, and particularly for anxious, high-achieving perfectionist types. I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm going to predict that there are some of these in the house today. This is the biggest problem, and this is why we are so uncomfortable about public speaking, because of all of these very, very high standards to which we hold ourselves. Now, if we had time, and this was an elaborated sequence of events, one of the first things I would ask you to do is to think about memorable speeches and lectures and performances that you have attended. And I would ask you to think about what were the elements of those things that made them so memorable. Chances are it won't be what they said. You may be able to remember a vague reference or some sort of concept that really landed with you, but it's actually more likely to be the how of the presentation that stays with you. The fact that you felt at ease, that you felt like your time was being respected, and I'll say more on that in a moment, that you were not being patronised or talked down to, and that you somehow also experienced a kind of paradox of public speaking, which is that you were an individual in a community. You were one person in a poly-headed organism that is audience. And because I have three of you still visible and I can see you are making notes, but I'm also taking it in turns to look you in the eyes, because it's this exchange that is what is likely to be memorable. It is this exchange of energy that is transmitted eyeball to eyeball that makes for the indelibility. And I would put it to you that this is what you are wanting in a good presentation. You are not trying to transmit knowledge or information or data or facts from your head into someone else's. There are many more efficient ways to do that than through speech. You can publish, you can give a service, you can editorialise, you can give a sermon. These ways are far more efficient. But what you are actually trying to do in this exchange, and I'll come back to this, is that you are trying to transmit enough of your passion about or for something that remains with the person afterwards sufficiently that they can then go and follow up on anything that you need them to follow up on. So by the end of a lecture like this, I might want you to go away and do some research on how do you warm up your vocal cords before you give a presentation. Or I might want you to go and think about, well, can I really use slides in a different way, and what kinds of opportunities does the PowerPoint actually offer as a form of theatre in its own right? These are the things that I'm going to talk about today. And in order to give me a structure to do this, this is my terrible pun. And one of the things that I'm going to try to do is to put you at your ease. I'm also going to use a lot of words that start with E. And so later on, when you come back to this and you'll go, what on earth was she talking about? You'll go, well, she did talk a lot about things that started with E. Now, what could they have been? And that may also help you to reassemble in your own mind anything that is particularly relevant to you. The main thing I would want to say to you is that I'm as nervous as the next person. I started today, you know, you possibly can see my hands are a little bit shaky. I started today going, where's my rescue remedy? I won't eat lunch because I feel too sick. You know, all of this kind of physical dread that any person with a pulse is likely to be feeling in this kind of situation. One of the most helpful things that one of my friends said to me years ago was that nerves are just excitement. It's the same feeling, it's just got a different name. And so keeping that in your mind, that there is a physical experience that you're going to go through. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's very similar to excitement, might allow you to find ways to come to this with a greater degree of comfort and ease. And ease is my method today. Ease is my approach today. Ease, playing with your ear as well, is my approach today. And I'll say more about this as we go on. Now, I think about PowerPoints and I think about presentations, particularly screen-based presentations, as a kind of theatre. And theatre, as we know, is typically a three-dimensional thing, and it has all kinds of tips and tricks. And that's what a good public speaking, good presentation is, a whole raft of, I'm going to muck this up, tricks and tips. And if you know what some of the tricks and tips are, it's like saying fog and frost. I'm always in awe of newsreaders who say fog and frost and not frog and fost. You have to think yourself through these things. If you think about the presentation as a kind of theatre, then you will realise that you have lots of different vocabularies that you can draw together as you compose your presentation. And I think this idea of composition is really worth thinking about. You know, you might map something out, but in the moment, you might decide that you actually want to do things in a different way because these circumstances require a different kind of composition. So one of the first things I think about is the different channels of reception that we have at our disposal when we are talking to an audience. And some people are audible people. They're good listeners. They've always got their, podcast plugged in. That's their primary channel for receiving information. So they're going to get a lot from you and what you have to say. That's good. That's fine. Other people, though, they're looking at their phones and they're distracted and they are maybe more visual people. So giving them something to look at, especially something that moves, is a really good tactic. I'll do that again, no, I won't. The third thing is, and I just saw it in you, David, something else that we can ask of people and offer them is the experience of the unexpected, of surprise. And PowerPoints are a wonderful device. Now, I bet if I'd said to you, well, I've got to do a public speech on presentation skills for academics, the last thing you would have expected to see was a slide of the Panamanian golden frog. But of course, it is perfectly meaningful to me as a metaphor for a part of the research that I've been doing. It's an animal that is now extinct in the wild, but still alive in laboratories, comme moi. But it also has this value of appearing when you least expected it. And that refreshes you. And this is one of the things that we have to do as presenters. We have to care for our listeners. We have a duty of care to our listeners. They are giving us 40 minutes of their lives or whatever it might be, and we in turn are contracted, I would argue, to give them something of value that is a good use of their time. Now, in order for it to be memorable, it has to not just be an intellectual experience. It can't be just about thought. The only way it's going to be memorable is if it actually taps their senses in some way. So listening, looking, proprioceptive, if you ask them to do something, if it's kinesthetic, all of those kinds of engagements and activities will allow the presentation to become memorable. And the intellectual stuff, the informational stuff will follow. But the most important thing is to get that physical and sensate response. So one of the ways we do that is by shocking the body. And the ways that we shock the body are many and varied. The most obvious is through laughter. Laughter is actually a shock reaction. It's something that you don't say, I'm going to laugh now, and then you laugh. Laughter erupts from you unbidden. So anything that you can do to cause an involuntary response in the body will allow the listener to start to move into this kind of different sort of receptivity. So shock, horror, surprise, laughter, disgust, animation, the moving object, the moving image, anything like this. So what I've just shown you, that these past 4 slides are all from different presentations I've given in recent months and years, and they just give you an idea of the different kinds of theatres really that I step into with the presentation. And you'll see that I try to signal tone up front. I try to let you know if you are allowed to laugh or not up front. I try to use the spatial affordances of the slide in a considered way so that I don't crowd them. And in fact, one of my pet hates in terms of presentations is slides that are crowded with text, and that text is exactly what the person is saying at the same time. In other words, the presenter is giving me a reading of something I could just as easily read myself if they would only send me the slide deck. So making use of this wonderful human capacity that we have to take information in through multiple channels and to take information of 2 different kinds in simultaneously, I can speak to you about this while you are looking at that. And you are then, I'm treating you as an intelligent individual because I'm expecting that you are capable of dealing with that. You are capable of dealing with information that's coming to you through your eyes at the same time as you are getting other information audibly. And I think that's a great point, Ruth, and I think it's true for some people, which is why captions can be fantastic. And I also think, and this is a part of the ethics of care that we have to bring to our presentations, is that we do need to be aware of accessibility issues, and we do need to be aware of the fact that not everyone is the same as us. And I extend that to, other aspects of difference, other aspects of privilege, other aspects of positionality. This is all part of the kind of ethics of care that we need to bring to our presentations. Now, this is all out of order. I have no idea what the next slide is. Let's find out. It's that one. Okay, so on extemporization. So I'm extemporizing right now. I do have a page of notes that, thank God, I had the foresight to prepare last week. But other than that, I'm speaking to you through improvisation. I don't know what I'm going to say next. So what are the techniques that I can call upon in order to do that and get away with it? Now, first of all, let me say that this is not something I'm recommending for everyone. But for some of you, it is something that you have the capacity to do, and you will give far better presentations if you let yourself go there. What I'm doing is giving you the illusion of extemporization. It's not extempore. I've spoken on this before in a number of different settings and environments. I have a certain set of tropes. I have gestures. I have speech patterns and habits that allow me to pause, to think, to ask you to listen, to gesture, to use my eyebrows in a way that is inviting those people whose eyes I can see to give me something back. And I'm getting it back. I have to tell you, I am getting it back. I can see the different responses. People are smiling, some, I'm getting back. So this stuff, when I teach, I say to my students in the classroom, I am eyeball powered. If you look away from me, I will fall silent. That stops them looking at their phones, let me tell you. And if they start looking at their phones, I fall silent. Because for me, that energetic exchange of eye-to-eye communication is a critical part of the illusion of extemporization. It's an extension of a courtesy. Yeah, it's a feedback loop, exactly as Jen's just said. It's a feedback loop. It's a courtesy. It's a part of the ritual of this kind of presentation, this kind of theatre. So how to do this? Well, eye contact with everyone. That's my first rule. So if I'm in an open space and everybody is sitting there, as people come in, if I know them, I greet them by name. Hi, Amara. I haven't seen you for ages, but I remember you. It's great to see you. Jude, I think I spoke to you about 3 years ago in a classroom on campus. I haven't seen you since. And I will make eye contact and directly greet people as they appear. That's the first thing. What else will I do? Well, in the course of the presentation, my eyes will travel right around the group. I will look at everyone. And I will see if I'm getting anything back. And I will go back to the ones who are giving me something back. And I will gradually filter out the ones who aren't. So by the end of the lecture or presentation, I will be speaking to those 6 people in the knowledge that 3 of them are probably getting something useful out of it. So it's the law of diminishing returns with this, right? So you go in there and you're in the amphitheatre and there's thousands of people looking at you, or 100 or 20 or 12, and it's awful. But you gradually close them out until you are talking to the ones who are actively signalling to you that they are listening to you, and then you talk. That's the secret. You talk. You speak fluently about something that you care about, to somebody that you are in connection with, in direct contact with. So trying to do that in COVID, of course, with the dastardly Zooms and Teams and Collaborate Ultras is another whole, it's another whole level, really, but it can be done. And so asking your students to, I have an open mic session at the beginning of every class that I teach, and I ask people to use their human voice. And using your voice is good for you psychologically, especially if you live alone and you've been alone during COVID times. To hear yourself speak is actually, it's good for your health. So I urge my students to use their voices and to introduce themselves and to tell me stuff, tell me what they had for lunch or tell me what they're watching, all of that sort of stuff. And that starts to develop this other kind of sense of an exchange. Absolutely, absolutely. The technology can be great. So eye contact, this is an example. This is me speaking at a thing a good few years ago now, and you can see all eyes on me from my community choir who were there to support me in this event, and me looking straight out, and it's this kind of drilling down. When I started doing this, I couldn't actually make eye contact. I couldn't bear it. So you look just between the eyes, just slightly above the bridge of the nose, and you can create this illusion that you are talking to somebody and you're actually not looking them in the eyes until you get the comfortable, feeling that you can, but you still are able to give this sense that you are sending energy out and receiving energy in return. So as I say, tricks and tips, something to practice, but all of this gives you the illusion of extemporaneous delivery, as does the judicious use of the pause. Now, the use of the pause signals that I'm thinking, that I'm thinking now about what to say next, where to go next. And that too creates the sense that this is something that is coming to me live, unfiltered, and, extempore. So these are all things that you can try. The other thing I do, and I recommend this really strongly, is if you're on the verge, if you think, oh, I might be able to extemporize, what you do is when you've mapped your speech and planned your presentation, you decide what your opening line is going to be, the first line of the second act. Everything has a 3-act structure, and the first line of the third act, and also your closing line, and you commit those to memory. So you've only got to learn 4 lines, 4 sentences. Repeat, 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 use your phone, play it back to you, repeat, repeat, pretend you're doing the 3-minute thesis contest. You now have in your body, in your memory, the architecture of your presentation. And all you've got to do now is get from A to B, B to C, C to D, and you're out the other side. On embodiment. Now, all of this is because, it is a physically uncomfortable experience, as is sitting in the space for the listener. We're not very good at this anymore. We're not very good at focusing anymore. So there's a lot of general free-floating discomfort going around. And physically giving a presentation is a very strenuous experience. My view of this is that it actually needs to be something that gives you energy rather than drains you. It should be enlivening, there's an E word for you, rather than innovating, there's another E word for you. So what can you do to stay in your body, stay present, prepare your body, and cope with these kind of miscellaneous but very uncomfortable sensations that are likely to accompany the experience of public speaking? Well, one is that you can have your water. Cheers. And you can stop and you can take a sip of water, which lubricates the vocal cords, lubricates the speech organs, and you are using your speech organs, and you want to enunciate and you want to project your voice in ways that allow people to hear you easily. That also buys you time. And if you're very nervy, as I am, you can drop a couple of drops of rescue remedy in there beforehand. And even as a placebo, I find that does something to me, and it's a part of the kind of ritual presentation, rituals that I go through before I give a presentation. I have a few of them. So I change out of my civvies into my presentational garb. And in my case, that involves usually sashing up. And some of you will have seen me, do this before. Have I got it on the right way? No, I haven't. And I started doing this when I was doing my PhD. I started putting words on sashes and wearing them. And, people might have thought that I was just being silly, making a costume for myself that says elderflowering. But actually, elderflowering, the neologism, is one of the key offerings of my PhD. So I'm not just doing this as a costume and as a barrier. I'm actually doing it as a form of text. And I become a form of a sandwich board, a billboard that is actually putting one of my concepts out into the world in a way where people can see it and read it and write it. So similarly, it's probably back to front, but you get the idea. The other things that I'm inclined to do, and you've seen this already from the earlier images, is that I go even further, and I will, in the course of a presentation, totally, if I can, transform myself over the life of the presentation so that years from now you may not remember a thing I said, but you will remember that in the course of the presentation I turned from one thing into another. Now, you can do this in much simpler, low-tech ways. Having a prop of some kind, having something to show, having something to share, having something to pass around a group, any of those sorts of things. Again, we're with the theatre of this. That's a tactile thing, and it engages the senses. So if you are fortunate enough to be in a room with real people and you have an object or an artifact that is connected to the work you are doing, pass it around, hand to hand. People, that tactile engagement with something gets that sensory thing engaged, and there you are, you're indelible. They can't forget you even if they want to. Okay, so continuing these ideas with a few more E words. Well, I've touched a little bit on ethics. As I say, I feel that we have a duty of care to our listeners. And for many of us who are creative writers, of course, we are familiar with something that's entered the world of things more recently, in my case anyway, is this idea of content warnings and trigger warnings. That's part of the duty of care that you need to show to a listener. So if you are taking an audience or a class or a group of people towards something uncomfortable or difficult or challenging or disconcerting, you have a duty of care to let them know beforehand, so that they have a choice about whether they remain or they remove themselves from that potential trigger. On elevation, this is the part, again with theatre, but for me, coming into a presentation like this ties in with the rituals that I was talking about before. What I need to do is kind of cross a threshold into a slightly altered state of exchange and communication. So a presentation to me is a slightly elevated thing. How to put it? It's not a sacred space, it's a space of secular ceremony. And in fact, in my classes in the past year, I've actually been taking the opportunity with the acknowledgement of country to make that a secular shared ceremony. We've been doing it in the non-fiction lab as well. Some of you will have seen Francesca Rendell-Short's wonderful Auslan version of the acknowledgement of country. And I think, taking a threshold moment like that and working with it and working with the formality of crossing that threshold between this is real life, what did you have for lunch, and this is the space of exchange that is the presentation, can be really valuable and can elevate things. So I have, in my classroom, I have this free open mic discourse, chatty banter stuff, and then the formal acknowledgement, and we cross the threshold and we're in an elevated space. We're in a kind of sacred secular, a space of exchange and a space of sharing, a space of respectful listening, all of these things that we would expect of an audience, and we would hope, we don't sit down expecting to have tomatoes hurled at us when we give a lecture. We expect a kind of, a relational respect. Finally, emotion. What did I want to say about that? I can't even remember. Look, I think we want to feel something. I want to feel something as I speak to you, and you want to feel something as you hear from me. So I need to somehow telegraph my passions, my enthusiasm, my style, my voice, my taste, my sense of humour, any of those kinds of elements that make you feel like you've met me somehow, somewhere. Now, someone's got their mic on and I'm getting some miscellaneous noise. So if that's you, would you please turn it off? And that's another good example of things, in terms of extemporaneous stuff, don't be afraid to go off book. If something happens, don't be afraid to put your map down or your plan down and go, well, that was interesting. How does that fit into what we're doing and what we're speaking about? I think those kinds of moments too increase the confidence in the listener that they are in safe hands. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. It's about the audience feeling like they are in safe hands, that they can trust you, that you can trust them, and that there is a measure of reciprocity about what is going on here. Exchange, energy, engagement, and encounter. 4 more very, very good E words. Some of them I've already alluded to. What do I want to say here? It just came into my mind and then it went away. So I'm going to tell you that it came into my mind and then it went away while I try and remember what it was. Nope, it's gone. How about that? I know what it was. It's come back. That this kind of experience should not be about my activity and your passivity. I am not trying to pour ideas into you like you are an empty vessel. A good presentation asks its audience to do something. And there are all kinds of ways that we can go about doing so. We can pose a rhetorical question at the very beginning of something. We can ask the audience to listen out for something or look out for something. We can warn the audience that we're going to come back to them at the end for a story of their own or a contribution of their own that somehow speaks to the subject at hand. And in a way, we've done that today with this because, of course, there will be an opportunity for a Q&A shortly. So any of those kinds of things that get the listener to do something. Don't just sit there. Do something. Write down an E word. There's my challenge to you. Write down an E word that I haven't mentioned yet that has something to do with the issue at hand. So giving the listener tasks of some kind or an activity or a question or a provocation or a prompt transforms the presentation from a passive experience in which I expect you to receive my wisdom to something that is much more, yes, absolutely. Thank you. My enthusiasm is very apparent. Egalitarian. Exactly, Jen. Thank you. And it needs to be that. And that goes back to the whole ethics of things. The last thing I want is to be spoken down to or treated like I'm stupid or I don't know it yet. So when you come into these fora, it's about this exchange, and that's the whole joy of the Academy for me. It's one of the most generous places that you can be because it is about the exchange of thought, the exchange of idea, the exchange of possibility. Enable. Yeah, these are all great words, and thank you for playing along at home. I see you, I hear you, and that is what I'm trying to say to you. It's that you need from me the sense. No exact, thank you, Emily Collier. You need from me the sense that you are seen. I need from you the sense that I am heard. And it's just that exchange. You're all on a roll now. So what I'm showing you here are some of the many guises that I occupy these days. I inhabit, or they inhabit me, I'm never quite sure which, as a presenter. And I do have a number of different persona, and yes, endings are coming. So these are just some of them, and they range from very, very serious to quite wacky and out there. And they've all served me well. And a lot of the preparation for me involves, who is speaking here? Which version of me is speaking today? Am I the teacher? Am I the colleague? Am I the what? So trying to find out who you are and who you need to be on that occasion is another part of it. Collaborative work can be great for this, and I'm just going to conclude with a few examples of other kinds of performative presentations and a call to arms to you to radicalise your presentations, to deconventionalise your presentations, because we're all sick to death of the old school ones. We've seen them, we've heard them, we know what you're going to say, we know what you're going to do, we've seen that PowerPoint 1,000 times before. So take advantage of this opportunity to push the boundaries and to use the affordances, there's that word again, and it doesn't start with an E, of the academic presentational landscape to do something fresh and new that is, you know, form and content align, just like good theatre, form and content in engagement and alignment with one another. Endings. Thank you, David, for your prophetic note there. On effective endings and elephants. Elephants are, of course, the elephants in the room that need to be addressed. So if you, for example, find yourself on a panel of all white middle-aged women, I would say that there is an elephant in the room, and that elephant needs to be addressed. Calling out the disparities and the inequalities of these environments is an elephant. And also, I think, speaking to, you know, if something terrible's happened to you, and if you've been up all night with, you know, food poisoning the night before, then that too is an elephant. And I think being real and acknowledging who you are, you know, if something terrible has happened to you, or if you've had a recent bereavement, or you lost your notes or whatever, declare these things. We're talking to adults, and we can treat each other as adults in a respectful way. Effective endings are really simply about leaving the audience with something arresting or unexpected, something that stays in their mind, again, using these same kinds of tools of shock or disgust or surprise or laughter, calling something out of them that they are not expecting to give you. So, and I think, you know, there are all sorts of techniques that we've been taught about restating the argument, if you're making an argument, or returning to the hypothesis or whatever, something that gives the presentation a shape and a coherence that links the first slide with the last. So I've gone back to the colour green here. You probably even haven't thought about that, but I did, because I've got a green slide at the end and a green slide at the beginning, and that gives a kind of a theatrical satisfaction, coherence, a shape that is pleasing to me to the presentation. So on that note, with no idea whether I've covered what I had hoped to cover or not, I will pause. And yes, that is Wanda. That's Wanda on the left. Wanderlust is one of my alter egos, and there I am with my beautiful partner, Polly Filler. Yeah, I'm happy to answer your questions if you have questions, or to hear comments or thoughts from anybody who would be interested in offering them. So thank you. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that fabulous presentation. You may like to stop sharing Wanda and Polly so that we can see you.
Shall do.
Thank you. Such a rich 45 minutes, just incredible. Do people, would someone like to jump in? I'm sure there's lots of questions that people have, or things that comments arising. You can either put in the chat or put up your hand or burst out into.
I guess I could open the chat. I don't know whether there were questions in there along the way. I did see, I saw lovely commentary.
I don't think there's any questions that are hanging.
Come on, somebody's got a question, surely.
Okay, let me start, Peter. Bravo.
Okay. Thank you.
What happens when you really, 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 really get stuck? Like, I could hear you kind of finding kind of traction moments, but yeah, what if you're kind of, the world really does fall out the bottom of your stomach?
I think you say so. I mean, you need to judge the audience and how receptive and forgiving they will be of that. But I think, you know, it depends when it happens as well in the presentation. And things do go wrong. You know, we have technological problems all the time with this stuff, or you find you're showing the wrong slideshow. Who hasn't done that? I've done that 100 times. You know, I've uploaded it to the class and I'm all ready to go, and I'm halfway in and I'm going, this isn't the right slideshow. What am I doing? I think you name it. It's one of those elephants that I was talking about. I think you say, I'm really sorry. I've you know, I've lost the plot here. Can we take 2 minutes for me to recover and regroup and go on? And you breathe. You know, so much of it is about breathing as well, breathing your way through things. So you pause and you take a breath and you acknowledge that it's not perfect, and then you begin again when you can.
Can I just ask a related question to do with voice? Like how, you know, because voice is so interesting, isn't it? Because we've got a kind of a voice with friends and a voice with colleagues and an informal voice and a formal voice. And what you're talking about here is a kind of a presentational voice. So here we're talking about presenting research, if you like, or presenting kind of projects. So, you know, like, do you think over the course of a practice that voice needs to be consistent? Like, what are your views on this? Or that it can adapt for different purposes? And what if you haven't adapted differently up until this point and you're thinking, oh, I want to experiment? Does that kind of undercut what you've done before, or can you add it to your repertoire? Like, how do you know, because you've obviously got kind of numbers of performative voices. So I'm just thinking of other people in this group who might not have even thought of this way of thinking about presenting research. So sort of tips on adaptation to different kind of, you know, scenarios, if you like.
I think repertoire is a great word, Francesca. And, you know, you've seen my work long enough to know I have a repertoire. I have a number of different kinds of things that I can do. And I actually have, I've got it here somewhere, I've got a little kind of, my presentation kit. It's like a 21st century vanity case, really, which has got all the bits and pieces in it that I could use if I needed to. I think that's a really great point, because you know, it would be very easy for me to become my own personal cliche, you know, doing the same thing over and over again. And here she goes again, and there's the moustache and there's the sash, and, you know, it's all happening. And I hope it hasn't come to that yet. Please tell me when it does. But I think it has to be adapted to every circumstance. And that's the beauty of theatre, you know, every audience is different. The play's the same each time, allegedly, but every performance is different because every audience is different. So reading the room, I think, is what you're talking about. And I think, you know, developing that capacity, that sensitivity, and again, it goes back to what happened at the very beginning of kind of, I'm in my body, but I've also got to take in a lot of information quite early in the piece about who is here, what they want. Oh God, there's somebody who heard me do exactly the same shtick last week. How am I going to mix it up? You know, so again, it's all about staying really present and being very sensitive to what is happening and trying to get the you know, you're talking about register, I think, as well, you know, that you can't come in there and go, hey, bro, you know, when it's a meeting of your senior exec, and pitching the tone correctly to it. And, you know, we know these things. We know, I think we have to trust ourselves that we know intuitively what the register of address could be. And then we just push it, just dial it up a little, just a little. And then next time, maybe dial it up a little bit more. Before you know it, you've got your moustache on, you know, and it is in this sort of slightly heightened, or even more than heightened form. And I, you know, I'll go back to what I said earlier about, I think that you do want to try and elevate the experience in some way, but that will take different elements each time.
And can I just jump in to pick up on Bernadette's question about tips to manage nerves? And because I was very conscious at the beginning when that your notes went there, and there was this sense that you kept talking and you kept going, and there was a quality there which I've also noticed in someone like Ross Gibson, has this kind of technique of being able to extemporize through thinking on one's feet when one doesn't really know what one is going to say yet, but one keeps talking. And I just wondered if you could tell us from your theatre background what, if there's any kind of embodiment warm-up techniques or something that you have from that background? Because I think that's the hardest part for a lot of us, is that first moment of like being able to sit with that uncomfortability and not go, oh, maybe I'll just read the script, blah, blah, blah.
That's so true, David. And that's also, you also reminded me that I wanted to talk a lot about reading, because I don't want to demonize reading. There is absolutely nothing wrong with reading, but there is good reading and there is bad reading. And I could talk about that some other time. But yes, you know, if we were in a room together, there's no way that I would sit to deliver this. And normally when I'm doing my classes, I actually have 2 shoe boxes and my computer comes up here so that I can stand and I plant my feet on the ground. And so that sense of being grounded and sinking into your trunk, sinking into your lower body, you know, all of those exercises that you would have done if you've ever done a meditation course or a yoga course or Pilates course, all of those things will serve you well, as will deep breathing exercises, really simple ones. And I do a physical warm-up. I often do, I'll sit down again if you don't mind. I do exercise before I present. And I do that to burn off the nervous energy. I still have the nerves, but a lot of that kind of extra energy will be gone. So I'll go for a, you know, brisk walk or something like that beforehand. And I do warm up this. I warm up the face. I warm up the organs of articulation, and there's all sorts of hideous exercises that you can do that will alarm your friends and family, that just simply stretch and move and warm up all of the muscles of the face and the lips and the teeth and the tongue, because I think that's the other thing that, you know, we need to be mindful of is clarity. Clarity of diction, clarity of speech. I was listening to a lecture that Sri gave the other day for our 3rd year class, and it was so beautiful, you know, just a pleasure to listen to her, because her diction was so clear, her enunciation was so beautiful, and there's real pleasure in listening to a warmed up voice. So all of those techniques, you know, they're simple little things that you can do. Singing is good. Humming is good. Humming is particularly good, actually, before you speak. It warms everything up, but it's low energy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Peter. I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking it's just clicked over to 1:30, which is the end of our allotted time. So please, if everyone could give a big, hearty Teams round of applause.
An emoji, that's all I want. Starts with E. Give me an emoji.
Throw something in the chat.
Yeah, throw an emoji my way and I'll be very happy. I'm easily satisfied. Thank you very much, everybody. It's really lovely to you know, have you here, and thanks for your interest and enthusiasm.
And look out for our next fictionLab forum, which there was a slide up at the beginning, and I have now not got that in front of me to give you that information, but I will just say that you'll be able to hear about that through the fictionLab communication channels. So look out for that next forum, which features and is led by James Oliver, who's a member of the fictionLab. So thanks again, Peter, and thanks to everyone else for joining us today. It's really wonderful.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.